All good? That is good. We are good. All right, welcome back. Today's topic, I want to talk about the 3 accessory exercises that every powerlifter should be doing. Yeah, I know, very clickbaity. I get it. I'm going to point out specific exercises, but I'm going to put them into 3 specific categories. So I'd rather talk about categories and then refer to exercises within those categories because I believe in doing a principles first approach. And it's important to come at this with a certain contextual understanding. And I mean, really, as blanket advice, it's important to assess any of these sweeping claims, like the 3 best this, or this is what I did to really change my bench or whatever. You really need to come at it with some sort of context in order to assess the validity of those claims. And so the context that I'm presenting this with is the context that we teach technique under here at ZeroW. And so the way I approach technique, the general philosophy is that we're all the same animal doing the same movements. You're a human, I'm a human, you've got a shoulder, I've got a shoulder, you've got a hip, I've got a hip. We're all the same animal doing the same movements. Within those movements, there's certain biomechanical rules that apply to everyone. So a good example of this is if you're a coach listening to this or you're a client that's experienced technical direction, most coaches might teach things differently, like what to do with your hips or what to do with your knees or your elbows or your shoulders when you're doing these lifts. Almost every coach is going to teach all their clients exactly the same way of breathing and bracing. And so we recognize things like that. We need to break down technique into what is biomechanically equal between all humans. So the shoulder moves in a very predictable fashion. This is why when you injure yourself and you go to a physiotherapist, they don't have to take a photo, an MRI, an X-ray, send your shoulder away, get a specific model made of your shoulder, then say, hey, here's your shoulder, here's what's wrong, here's how we fix it. They just pull a model of a shoulder from under the desk. They say, you're a human, you have a shoulder. This is how a shoulder works. This is how we are going to address the issue with your shoulder. So we need to take that sort of approach. That's the angle that I'm coming at this with. And basically I wanted to segregate it into the 3 main lifts and look at like one key accessory for each lift or one key accessory group for each lift. This is kind of pressing in the sense that modern programming these days tends to be a little bit more hyper-specific towards the comp lifts and a little bit less accessory centric. You can have whatever opinion on that, but this is a good way of looking at like what are the golden ticket accessory exercises that we potentially should be doing as powerlifters to ensure our success. Like if you're pressed for time or you're in a hyper specific program where you don't have the energy or the time to do many accessory movements, these would be the go-tos. So we'll start with squats. One more thing. The other angle that I'm coming at this with from a contextual standpoint is that there is so much carryover in principle to the biomechanical rules between all 3 lifts. What I mean by that is something that's good for your shoulders on squats is good for your shoulders on bench press and vice versa. Because the scapular position that we're trying to achieve in a squat and a bench press, the range that we're taking our shoulder into extension in a squat and a bench press is actually really similar. So if we can maximize it on one, we'll find that we tend to get carryover into the other. Conversely, if there's an issue with it on one lift, there tends to be an issue with it on all 3 lifts. And so not only are these accessories bang for buck in terms of the lift I'm tying it to, but also bang for buck across the board in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to start with squats. My go-to group of accessories would be some sort of leg pressing. And so the angle that I'm coming from here is that in squats, I'm going to break things down into 3 biomechanical rules, which are going to be centric around the hips, the brace, like the torso, and the shoulders, the upper body. We're creating power at the muscles of the legs and hips. We're transferring that power up through the torso into the shoulders. The number 1 most important rule out of those 3 then is going to be what's happening in the lower body, because that's where the power is coming from. And so some form of leg pressing movement is going to be really important for a few things. When we're looking at accessory design, we want to look at things that we can remove systematically from the main lift and train independently. And so when it comes to the squat, we can take out the action that the legs are doing and train that further independently. In other words, the rate limiter in the squat is very rarely the strength of the legs. It's often a breakdown in the bracing system and a breakdown in the upper body, the connection between the legs and the bar. Something breaks down in there, and the legs are then unable to express the strength they have into the barbell. If it's not an issue with one of those two things, and if it's an issue in the legs, then this is even better news, because we can isolate the legs, we can remove the legs from what the torso and the upper body is doing by doing some sort of leg pressing movement. So when I say some sort of leg pressing movement, there's a few things that I'm looking for here to tick off as being relevant in this category of accessory. Can we mirror the stance that we use for a squat? Can we take the hips through the range that we use in a squat? Because if you're training like half range, the hardest part is always the bottom, the end range. So if you're trying to make your squat better, where you have to squat below parallel, and you're doing a half rep on a hack squat, it's no good. You need to be going through full range. So can we achieve full range in whatever accessory exercise that we're picking? Can we isolate? Can we remove the complication of bracing, so torso control and upper body, what we have to do with our shoulders and our upper back? If we can, then we've found and finally, arguably the most important context, can we load it relative to our strength on a squat? So for example, you could argue that you can take away some aspect of core and upper back and focus on taking the hips through range by doing something like a goblet squat. You're a lot more upright. If your upper back gets out of shape, it's not that big a deal. You're upright, so the core is not going to be that taxed. However, it's hard to load a goblet squat. If you're a 300 kilo squatter, you're not going to do a 300 kilo goblet squat. I'm sure you all understand that. So instead, we're looking at something that can add constraints to the upper body and the torso, and where we can really load the legs. Leg press is going to be, for me, the gold standard. I say that it's the gold standard not just for the principles that I spoke about, but also ease of access. Most people have access to a leg press. Because other examples that could fit in here might be a belt squat. I would put belt squat quite low on the list. The reason being, most people just butcher a belt squat. They just do it really funky. The way that the direction that the belt tends to pull you tends to throw you off the kind of squat pattern that you'd actually use in something like a low bar squat. A hack squat might fall into this. You've got an element of like axial loading, so your torso can get a bit taxed, but nothing like a back squat. So a hack squat would fit in some form of squat machine, like a Rogers Power squat, for example, a pendulum squat to some degree. But for me, the gold standard is going to be a leg press. A leg press tends to have a lot of options in terms of what you can do with your feet. In terms of how you can angle things. Lots of leg presses these days have multi-angles, so you can put your feet in a more comfortable position or a more relative position to the squat itself. The other thing I love about the leg press, which is maybe a little bit more unique to, say, a pendulum or a hack squat or a belt squat, is that you can watch your hips. So like if you're trying to iron out a discrepancy in creating torque in the hips, your knees are all over the place and you're trying to control your hips a little bit more, you can literally just watch your knees and get immediate feedback as to whether you're staying in position or not. So, first major accessory, go-to accessory that I'd suggest every powerlifter has in their program is some sort of leg pressing movement. My go-to would be a leg press. All right. Second one, let's move on to bench press. This one I found it a little bit harder to come up with the answer because I was tussling between, okay, well, we need pressing for sure. So some sort of accessory press is going to make a lot of sense, like a dumbbell press. But you could argue that you can build bench press strength in the bench itself. We can go on a long tangent about that. I find that especially the more arched and less range of motion that somebody has in bench press, the less relevant doing barbell bench press is to making them stronger. People who have short ranges of motion, really wide grip, really big arches, need to do less bench and more pressing in general. So machine pressing, dumbbell pressing, close grip pressing, buffalo bar pressing, that's another story altogether. Something that's relevant to everyone, regardless of your arch, is going to be, if we want to express max strength in a bench press, we need to do it from a stable platform. Right? So think your pecs lever your arm across your body. In order to maximize the power that the pecs can transfer to that action, the leverage point needs to be fixed. Think of it like a deadlift jack, right? You hook a deadlift jack under the bar, you pull on the handle, and it lifts the weight off the ground. If where the deadlift jack handle connected to the base was loose or broken, when you pull, you lose leverage, you lose power. come back to the body. Pec levers the arm across the body. In order to get the most power out of that leverage point needs to be fixed. So your shoulder needs to be fixed in position. What's going to control that? Well, the muscles of your upper back. And so in order to create the relative scapular position that you're going to need in a bench press, you're going to need to train through that motion, through full range, with a relative scapular position that matches the bench press, which so happens to match the squat, which has major carryover to the shoulder position in the deadlift. How are we going to achieve that? Some variation of row. So a row is going to be huge. And I actually hate the concept that rows are an important accessory to powerlifting, because a lot of people just butcher rows. They just grab a bar and reef it, do heavy pendlay rows, or grab the stack and just pull the stack from point A to point B. The movement of the row is far less important than the range of motion that you take your shoulders through. Like, you want to take your shoulders through a range of motion that matches a low bar squat. I challenge you to actually do this with your scaps in the same relative position that you're looking for. So for lack of better terminology, scaps back and down, and be able to go through the full range. Guaranteed most of you listening cannot do that. Or if you can do it, you have to significantly reduce the range in order to achieve it. Getting good at that is going to be your ticket to a better squat and a better bench press as far as upper back control goes. It is like goated. It is the best. You need to be able to do that if you're going to have a massive bench and support the bar for a massive squat. If you're one of these people that gets arm pain, guess what the fix is for that? The neural arm pain that you get from low bar squatting that makes you not able to bench. Do your rows like that. It will fix it over time, not straight away. And do it all the time, not just when you feel the arm pain. That's when it's too late. Anyway, rows done with full range. Probably the gold standard here is going to be some form of chest supported row where you can take your shoulders through full range. So like a chest supported T-bar row where the implement doesn't get limited by hitting the pad. A seal row with like a bent bar so you can take yourself through full range. Even just like a rigged up chest supported single arm cable row, a chest supported machine row where you can go through full range. That I would say would be the gold standard. Why? Because you've got a defined measure of what your torso is doing. You can measure where if you're cheating the range by just arching your back. There's nothing wrong with arching your back, by the way, during a row. That's fine, as long as you can take your shoulders through full extension with the relative scapular position. Arching is not a bad thing because thoracic extension strength is an important part of supporting bench and also creating the position for squats and deadlifts. So not a bad thing to arch your back, but a chest-supported row will really highlight if you're cheating or not. A seated cable row I really love, but you have to use an implement that allows you to go through full range. So the bigger you are, especially, like you've got a big chest, a big belly, if you've got short arms, and you're doing like a close grip V-bar row, you're only going to do like a third of the range. You're going to hit your torso before your shoulders are anywhere near the kind of range that they need to be going through in order for this to be effective. So you're going to have to use an implement that allows you to go through full range. You need to bias retraction and depression. So aim low down your torso, below your belly button. As your shoulders are coming in line with as your arms are coming in line with your body, wrap your shoulders behind you, really open up your chest, arch your back up and out. All of that's going to be great stuff in order to sort of have the kind of transfer carryover into the bench press and the squat that we're looking for. Again, an important part of the context of choosing this particular exercise is going to be loadability. So for example, a cable row or a chest-supported T-bar row, you're going to be able to load up a lot more than like a bat wing row where you're leaning forward on an inclined base and pulling with dumbbells, just because the art of setting that up is quite difficult. You can still go heavy as fuck on them for sure, but a T-bar chest-supported row is probably going to be more effective in that sense. Of course, like I said, it's going to have an important carryover to all three lifts. Finally is going to be deadlifts. Number one category of accessory exercise to be pumping in deadlifts is some form of torso strengthening movement. So again, this is going to be super important as far as carryover towards squats as well. This is why if you're a sumo puller, you should be doing some form of conventional deadlift. What we're looking for here is the bottleneck for most people's deadlifts and some people's squats is a breakdown in either the brace or the upper back. So basically keeping the torso rigid while there's axial load, so load going through the spine, and we're moving that torso forwards and backwards. We're moving the torso in that sort of coming forward and coming backwards action. When we do that, the further away we get away from our midline, the more tension and pressure there's going to be down our spine that we have to resist. If we can't resist it, we round our back really badly, and that potentially kills the power of the movement. Makes it really hard for your legs to do what they need to do in terms of transferring power from the legs to the bar. The biomechanical rules, like how the power moves and transfers through the lift into the bar, are exactly the same on squats and deadlifts. So strengthening your legs really comes in the squat department because we're going through more range. Leg strength doesn't tend to be a limiting factor in the deadlift, just by virtue of the fact that there's less range of motion. Torso strength and maintaining that torso position tends to be a far more limiting factor, which is why I'm talking about it here. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to create a rigid torso with axial loading while we're going forward and backwards like that? Well, this is where we're looking at like an RDL, a stiff leg deadlift, a good morning. Like I said, if you're a sumo puller and a relatively upright squatter, you're looking at like a conventional deadlift. That's it. That's the category of exercise. I would put the gold standard as an RDL, especially an RDL to like some sort of block, because you can go through the torso range without going through the full range of the movement. It tends to be a lot more loadable than, say, a good morning or a stiff leg deadlift. That's pretty much it, honestly. The important thing, again, about doing something like an RDL or a stiff leg or whatever it is specificity to the position that you're trying to create in the squat and deadlift. So like if we talk about the row, we're talking about, okay, you need the relative scapular position. You need to be going through full range, all of that stuff. Same thing here. If you get all bent out of shape, you're rounding your back completely on deadlifts and you're arching your back and sticking your ass out on a squat, when you do an RDL, if that's your weakness, you're just going to do the same thing. You're either going to round really bad or stick your ass out. So you have to do it in such a way that you're mirroring the position you want to achieve in those main lifts. So set your brace on really tight. Hold that brace. Hold that torso stiffness while you're going through the movement, and let that, like the performance of the movement, dictate the weight that you choose. Don't just try and lift more. Try and lift more right. And right being relative to the position that you're trying to create in your main lift. All right, that's going to be my 3 top accessory categories, and within that, my 3 top accessory movements, if you are a powerlifter, that are kind of non-negotiable to your progress over the long term. Hope that helps. Let me know what you want to hear me talk about, and I'll see you next time. Bye.